Welcome to the Columbus Academy 21st iteration of the Currier Lecture Series. Currier Lecture Series is named in honor of Phil Currier, upper school head from 1986 to 1995. He encouraged students and faculty to challenge themselves and make a difference in communities. I'm going to go a little bit off here. I would also think that Mr. Currier helped us to sort of think beyond our own experiences and to try to be independent thinkers, for sure. Our speaker today, Dr. Tyler Denmead, will share his experience founding and leading New Urban Arts. New Urban Arts brings young people and artists together to make a positive change in their communities. It's recognized by First Lady Michelle Obama as one of the premier youth development programs in the country. Dr. Denmead is currently assistant professor of the School of Art and Design at the University of Illinois, and is writing a book titled Youth in the Creative City. But the most important fact concerning Dr. Denmead is he's an Academy alum from class of '94. I'm going to go off script here again. So the reason I kind of wanted to talk a little bit tonight was I was like the art guy in our class. And it was really kind of interesting reflecting on you as an art professor and someone super involved in the arts, and then me on more the maker side. And I always thought, like when I heard about what you were doing, and I was like, that's so cool, like how do you, I think even one time I reached out on Facebook, like I want to do what you did, like, and you were like, yeah, you have a lot of stuff, and figure it out, you know. But I started thinking back about for today's talk, and I started thinking about how I always thought you were just a super interesting guy and interesting thinker. You know, you were reading like the Zen and motorcycle book in high school.
It's
like,
true.
What? You know, like I was his catcher. He had a mean curveball. Left-handed pitcher. He worked with Coach Stahl, so we got to know him on that side. And it was just, you know, I remember you listening to like Jethro Tull in middle school, and I'm like, who? You know, I'm listening to like Debbie Gibson. Listening to like Jethro Tull. You know, so Tyler was always like that guy that like, I feel like inside, a lot of us wanted to think how you thought. So there's a lot of things, and I think that's something also that Phil Currier wanted us to do, was to try to think for ourselves and make our own path. You know, like what kind of guy bikes from Mckee? Well, lo and behold, I hang out with Tyler and Kate, and you know, Kate's riding her bike with her daughter to school in the morning. So, and it even goes back to, I was just having a quick interlude with Mr. and Mrs. Kessler, and Claire wrapped it up pretty well. She goes, you know, that's exactly what I would think Tyler and his family would do, like when I told them that story. So I think it's just a consistent lifestyle of being a really great thinker. Earlier in the day, it was wonderful hearing you talk to the students. We had a wonderful forum with the kids where they're asking interesting questions, and granted, I might have been prodding them a little bit because I don't know if you know high school kids, they don't really want to speak up too often. But you know, I think that a couple of kids stumped you with some tough questions, and I think as an educator and as an artist, it's really a great opportunity to have you here. So I think a lot of us are really excited, so welcome, Dr. Tyler.
Can you hear me?
Just leave it.
Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Andy. I have to laugh every time I hear Dr. Denmead in this context. When I was in high school, I volunteered with Coach Stahl as the athletic trainer, student athletic trainer here, and my friends made me a t-shirt that said Dr. Denmead on it. So that's what that means for me in this context. In fact, I aspired to be go into sports medicine actually when I left high school, and my life has taken a radically different journey, not one that I ever could have predicted or prescribed. And so tonight I'll tell you a little bit about that journey and a lot about the work that I've been doing. I wanted to talk a little bit about Mr. Currier for a moment. Mr. Currier was my were just trying to place, I think he was my freshman geometry teacher. He was my homeroom advisor. So I was saying to the upper school assembly today, he would say homeroom with his New England accent, homeroom, which sounded completely exotic to me when I was here. What is a homeroom? And he was a mentor to me, and Kate and I, with my wife, I can't say that here, class of 93, we were talking today about what we did when we found out that Phil Currier passed away. We were in Columbus, and we both drove, we drove to Denmead Woods Park and just kind of sat there unsettled and dealing with the, absence, and but still dealing with his presence and wondering what that was going to be like moving forward. And you find out that people that have an impact on you, they stay with you. They live with you. You carry them forward. Phil Currier has been one of those people for me. And in a really weird way, Phil Currier appeared in my life this past week in ways that didn't have to do with this talk. So some of you might have seen, I had some very strong opinions last year on Facebook when there was that whole controversy about the Confederate flag, which I'm not going to talk about. But you'll see this picture from a classmate of mine, David Feinberg, posted 2 years ago now. He saw this photo posted from the Academy on the Facebook page, and he said, "I thought of you." So I thought you'd like it. So why is he saying that? It was January, I think I have in my notes here, January 24th, maybe 1993, and I was riding up the driveway in the car up here, this long drive, and the news was on, the car news was on, and I had found out that Thurgood Marshall died. And Thurgood Marshall was the first African-American Associate Supreme Court Justice, first African-American Supreme Court Justice, and he also was the lawyer who presented in front of the court on Brown versus Board of Education, winning and based on the argument that schools that are separated based on race are unequal. And so when I got up to the front of the school, the flag was not at half-mast. And the etiquette in that situation is that the flag should be at half-mast until the Associate Supreme Court Justice is buried. So I complained a lot those days as a high school kid, and I was pretty entitled too. And I walked into Mr. Currier's office, and I was like, the flag is not half-mast, it's not half-mast. What are we doing here? And I think, I was coming to my own sort of understanding at that point in life of race and racism and my own racism and structural racism. But I think I did have like a intuitive understanding that there was actually something pretty complicated about a private schooling in the second half of the 20th century is inextricably linked with the desegregation of public schools. And so there was something, I don't know, really unsettling for me and uncomfortable for me about the flag not being at half-mast here. I should say, by the way, that today, one of the things that really stood out to me was how different the student body here is than when I was a student. Okay, so anyways, I can't quite remember what Mr. Currier said to me in that moment, but the message to me was very clear, and that is, this is your school, this is your passion and concern, and you can do something about it. You should do something about it. And I hadn't actually thought about it that way. So he gave me this permission to act in ways that was a gift. So Phil Currier, Craig Seeger, my lifelong friend, and I, we were both on Service Club. And from that point forward, for the next year and a half, the two of us went out every morning and raised and lowered the flag. That's what we did every day. We took care of the flag. And so I say that as a way of introducing a kind of philosophy that's been sort of key to my teaching. I taught at the high school level and at the college level. where, here I am, I'm acting on the social world, I'm driving up the driveway, I'm listening to the radio, I'm reflecting on the social world, I'm looking around me, I'm thinking about what's happening, and then I'm noticing something that's uncomfortable, and then I'm acting on the world again, trying to make it more just, more equitable. This is what we call praxis, and it's something that I've been committed to throughout my whole life. And so I see Mr. Currier as sort of, I don't know, I associate him in many ways with that kind of permission, giving people permission to act. So it is a gift to be here in this tribute to him. Some of you are probably interested in like how I got to going from being Dr. Denmead to Dr. Denmead. And I'll tell a little bit of that story. I've also gone off script here, so I'm going to have to find my notes where I am. I hope that's okay. I'm going off script. Okay. Okay, so that's why David Feinberg, as you can see, put that on, and here we go. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this place and how I came to start this place and what it is. This place is called New Urban Arts. It's in Providence, Rhode Island. When I left the academy, when I was explaining the assembly today, by the time I graduated here, I was pretty convinced I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon. My senior project, I followed Gary Rosenberg, is that his name? Dr. Rosenberg, yeah. Which was totally gross. Being in the operating room was disgusting. I had the honor and pleasure of working with Mr. Stahl for several years. When I got to Brown and I continued on with student training, athletic training, and I realized that actually athletic training wasn't that interesting. Working with Mr. Stahl was interesting. And so, I stopped doing that. I mean, I kept doing it actually the whole time I was at Brown, but it just became a way to make money, not a passion. At the same time, when I showed a slide today where I was, I really saw myself as a mathematician, a scientist. I was really drawn to puzzles, those kinds of puzzles. And I was actually kind of alienated a little bit by the arts, didn't see myself as a maker as such. And that changed a lot, quite a bit. My senior year here, Andy and Mr. Block led a little ceramics renaissance in the old cafeteria kitchen there. And a lot of us would go down there after lunch, during lunch, during recess, after school, we were making. And so I was working through questions of form and material and process, and I started to think about myself as a maker. And when I got to Brown is right next to RISD, and RISD is like this elite art school thing, and they say if you go to Brown, you can take classes at RISD, so I thought, well, I want to go take ceramics classes at RISD because it's strict. And so I went to RISD, and they said, actually, we don't have enough wheels for Brown students, so you can't do that. So it was like a dream denied. And so that stopped, and then a year later, my sophomore year, I went off meal plan, and the idea was I actually don't know how to cook for myself. This is something I need to learn to do. And there's another college in Providence called Johnson & Wales, which is where Emily Agassi went. And so I was like, I'm going to take cooking classes at Johnson & Wales. I'm going to learn how to cook. This is great. So I went to my student advisor at Brown. I was like, can I get credit to go take cooking classes? And she looked at me like I was nuts. Cooking is not an intellectual work. You don't do that. I don't know what you're thinking. Go back to chemistry class, which I did. And then there was still this inkling here for like the artistic side, and so I ended up, I took an Introduction to Ancient Chinese art class my freshman year. It was great with Maggie Bickford. She couldn't get through a 50-minute lecture without having a cigarette break, which I love. Having to smoke just because that was fun. She was an amazing lecturer. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to do this history of art thing. And I became an architecture history major. The summer after my sophomore year, I went to an art school over the summer in France to take, it was a study abroad program, so I was going to take some art history courses there. And I thought, okay, here's my chance to learn how to cook. I'm going to France. Like, when in Rome, this is what you should do. So the summer of my sophomore year, I wrote letters in choppy French that I would have learned from Mr. Moody. It's not Mr. Moody's fault that I had choppy French, that's for sure. I wrote letters to chefs saying, near this school, saying, I'm going to be at this school, do you mind if I work with you? Can I be your apprentice? Which is mad, because I can cook, and they have like really strict rules about who gets to be apprentices and all that. Anyway, one young guy responded and said, that sounds great. And so, like entering into a kind of apprenticeship with Mr. Stahl, I'm entering into an apprenticeship with this chef in France. And the trade was that I would teach him how to speak English, and he would teach me how to speak, or teach me how to cook. And it ends up where, like, I end up moving into his house, and I like kind of left. I didn't really go to the school. I just sort of worked for him, and it was amazing. And I went back the next summer. I've been back several summers throughout my life working for him. And so, anyways, I went through this kind of transformation. And for me, cooking, I thought a lot about, again, some of the same things I was working on the Potter's Wheel. Questions of composition, balance, and color, and texture, and harmony, all the kinds of things you might think about if you're a painter or a musician, I don't know. But what I was really excited about was thinking about chefing as a kind of social practice, where I was kind of setting the stage for some kind of shared, heightened aesthetic experience that was happening out in the dining room. That was felt really exciting to me, and I cared a lot about it. So I'm going to get to this place eventually. It seems crazy to go, but this is like the rich promise of the liberal arts education, I think, right? Taking this journey. Okay, so I was also, when I came back from that experience, back to Brown, I was a changed person, seeing myself perhaps in a new way. And I had been involved in a lot of public service projects while I was on campus at Brown, particularly around questions of education justice. I had been working in a school with a third grader once a week from the day I arrived on campus my freshman year, so 2 years in. So I was starting to think again, continuing to think about these questions of education equality, inequality. And so I started to put these two interests together and marrying together the idea of trying to sort of set this kind of table for people to have a kind of shared experience, and questions of how to become a maker, how to become a creative and critical thinker, and also questions of education justice. And I got a fellowship from Brown my senior year for $4,000 based on this idea. And they're like, go for it, tell us what happens. And I took the $4,000 and I gave $3,000 to this church and said, can I have a room for the year so we can try this out in the studio? And they said, sure. And then I took $1,000, I bought supplies, and then my senior year in college, I didn't go to class really. I structured it so I went from class Wednesday from 3 to 5:30, and then I was free the rest of the week because I did some independent studies. I was like hustling the university a little bit. And I wasn't telling my parents. And I spent 9 to 5 in schools, recruiting kids, talking to teachers, saying I got this idea, I'm looking for people to come play with me, and people started to come to play. And then that spring, I'm just going to give you some of the legit, like the kind of, everybody always asks me about the pragmatics, and I always forget the pragmatics. Like, how did you get from there to there? It never makes any sense. Okay, so then I applied for this fellowship, another fellowship, the spring of my senior year, for social entrepreneurs, and this whole movement of social enterprise was sort of kicking off at that time, which was about young people with bold ideas who are going to apply a kind of business savviness to addressing social problems. And the Echo and Green Foundation was sort of a major, or is a major player in that field, and they gave me $60,000 over 4 years to build this thing. that money, we got a new studio right next to 3 high schools. Providence is weird, where these 3 public high schools are sort of all within a half mile of one another. And I put it right in the center of those 3 schools, opened the doors, and I went to the university campuses, recruited students from Johnson & Wales, from RISD, from Brown, from Providence College, from Rhode Island College, from CCRI. That was like my volunteer labor. I was volunteer labor. And I went and recruited students, and I bought supplies, and saw what would happen. So 20 years later, the place it looks kind of like that. That's the story. How am I doing? Good.
Talk a little louder.
Louder?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Am I mumbling? Can you hear me?
No, your mic's not on.
It's not on?
It's on.
It's on?
Just talk about it.
Talk louder. How's this? Better?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you hear any of that?
Yeah.
Was I talking into the wilderness? I feel bad.
You know, some of us are old.
I'm getting there. All right. Okay. So, tonight in this talk, I should also say, I ran this place from 1997 to 2007, so for a decade. Then I left in 2007 to go to graduate school. Then, after graduate school, I went back to this place in 2012 to hang out with them for a year. This time as a researcher, not as an administrator who was helping build the place. And through that research, I've been working with them the last couple of years. I'm now working on this book. So that's the sort of 20-year timeline, okay? And the book is about how youth are positioned in a city, Providence, that's branded itself as the creative capital. And so tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the creative capital, the creative city, what that's about. And I'm going to share you some outcomes from this place that we can really be excited about, celebrate. And I'm going to also share some stories that are actually just kind of tragic, that I was implicated in, and are a little uncomfortable too. And by telling these stories, I want to sort of point out the complex and kind of contradictory landscape that sometimes emerges when we're committed to the common good. Who was that?
Your son.
My son? Elliot. We're good, brother. Okay. So Urban Arts is now celebrating its 19th year. Youth members come to the studio after school, on the weekends, during the summer, and they can participate as little as much as they want for free. They're provided with space, supplies, equipment, and expert guidance in the arts and humanities from visual artists, designers, musicians, writers, activists, yoga teachers, academic tutors, life coaches, and college advisors. Might sound a little bit like this place. They engage in a variety of disciplines in media, from screen printing to spoken word poetry, from youth radio to portfolio development, from folk history to music, from art installation to help with their math homework. I want to talk a little bit about why the arts and humanities now. Why are we defending the arts and humanities? And I'm going to talk about that from the perspective of someone who works at a public institution in a school of art and design where we have to be staunch defenders of the arts and humanities for reasons I'll show you. I was meeting with high school kids today, and there's this really acute sort of pressure to succeed. There's some fear to fail. And those were some of the questions that I got today. And what I said to them, a lot of high school graduates are not entering into the same world that I entered into as a high school student. High student debt loads, bifurcated labor markets, intensified competition for high-paying jobs. This is there's a sense that you need to have a precocious sense of achievement. I mean, you have to succeed early on in life if you're going to make it. And as a result, there is a pressure, I think, for college kids to be directed towards the STEM fields. These are the science, technology, engineering, mathematics. I felt some kind of internalized pressure, maybe when I was and high school, but that pressure is coming from really strongly on high school graduates these days. And at the university, at places like the University of Illinois, where I work, we're having debates about a crisis in the arts and humanities, and that is the number of college students who are majoring in the arts and humanities. And the assumption is that there's a rapid decline, which is going to put people like me out of a job, but also sort of raising larger questions about what the purpose of higher education is. The statistics don't actually bear this out, if you're curious. This graph shows the percentage of humanities majors in relation to the college-age population since the 1950s. You'll see it peaks in the 60s, and it's pretty much leveled out since the 80s. So we're not having a crisis. Things are kind of staying the same. But the arts and humanities are under constant attack for their irrelevance, particularly in the context of public institutions where youth at New Urban Arts are more likely to go to college, given its unbearable cost. Here's some quotes. I'm going to pick on a political party here for a moment, but here's some quotes that are essentially saying, this is the kind of rhetoric we're often encountering in political debates. This is Pat McCrory, is the governor of North Carolina. It's talking about a shift in public funding. It's not about butts and seats, but butts and jobs. So you've got to get a degree that helps you get a job. And the public, we should not be funding sort of irrelevant fields, in this case, as gender studies. And here's another one, others make more money than philosophers, which that's been actively debated and debunked, questioned and challenged. It's a vital interest of the state to have, is not a vital interest, I should say, is it a vital interest of the state to have more anthropologists? I'm picking on some folks here, but to be honest, President Obama has also been warning against frivolous degrees, and he's also been pushing accountability measures that are largely around how much money you're going to be making once you graduate from college as an indication of the quality of your college education. So there is a great irony to this prevailing wisdom. I had the chance to hear the former president of Yale speak a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about how at the precise moment that we are attacking the arts and humanities and our liberal arts education for its failure to prepare American citizens for work in the global economy, policymakers in Asia are turning to U.S. for assistance in incorporating the arts and humanities into a rich liberal arts education using an economic rationale. That is, education leads to the kind of creative independent thinking that is necessary to producing economic growth through innovation and entrepreneurship. And this is an example of the National University of Singapore partnering with Yale to form this new liberal arts college based on the American liberal arts model. Notwithstanding this irony, these global economic and education debates are important, but they ignore other reasons why the arts and humanities have been valued, for example, at the Columbus Academy as central to a liberal arts education. We have long assumed in this country that the democratic process works best when citizens are liberally educated. They can reflect and reason clearly, precisely, and critically, skills that perhaps seem somewhat in short supply at the moment, given our current political debates. Moreover, our liberally educated citizenry is the best guarantor of individual rights and freedoms. This citizenry is most likely to reject oppression and authoritarianism. So these were the central arguments put forward in the Yale report of 1828 that was highly influential in the development of liberal arts instruction, which, we should add, was largely for elites. We can think about this intellectual lineage with respect to the Academy by putting one of the founders, Samuel Prescott Bush, and his grandson and Yale, George W. Bush, adjacent to the title page of that Yale report. So what has always been troubling to me about this history is how a liberal arts education rich in the arts and humanities has traditionally been an economic and social privilege. There are some that will even argue that it is precisely this segmented access to a liberal arts education and the privileging itself of creative experimentation, critical abstract thinking, and collaborative problem solving that plays a strong role in reproducing socioeconomic stratification. In other words, if you do not acquire these dispositions of creative thinking, critical abstract thinking, through, for example, an academy education, you'll be out of place at upper tiers of society where those dispositions are to be expected. So in being out of place, you're being excluded, and you're excluding yourself. So education and social stratification are linked in ways that are far more complex than individual effort and academic achievement. That's my view. So when I started New Urban Arts, I thought a lot about this connection between stratification and access to a liberal arts education, which is why I'm troubled by this tendency now to sort of privatize the liberal arts tradition again. So I should also acknowledge that I'm a little close to suggesting that a liberal arts education rich in the arts and humanities should be credited for its potential to civilize the working class and racially marginalized youth, such as those who go to New Urban Arts. And in fact, I'm going to tell you a story that shows you how access to this education can actually work against racialized and low-income youth in surprising ways, uncomfortable ways. But in the meantime, I want to respond to this criticism that youth need civilized with the liberal arts education in two ways. And the first is that as the world evolves and different points of view are increasingly importantly recognized, it is vital that we think about what disciplines have been delegitimized and should be legitimized, and what ways of thinking have been ignored or suppressed and should be invited into the liberal arts curriculum. Of course, the best example of that is when this school went coeducational and had to think about what that meant for its curriculum, which we experienced as high school students. As our English, in particular, I remember how our English curriculum was changed. But for this reason, the disciplines offered at New Urban Arts change regularly and place particular emphasis on celebrating ways of knowing and thinking that don't necessarily count in traditional school settings or perhaps traditional liberal arts curriculum. And this image shows some young people at New Urban Arts hanging out in the library, working on beats, working on music that they upload to SoundCloud. And the second way that I want to respond to this criticism that the liberal arts education is a civilizing force is that I am most invested, and this is Phil Currier perhaps speaking, is how the arts and humanities allow us to create and experience alternative realities, stories, and selves in the past, present, and future. And this is what Andy was saying in the introduction. I am drawn to the arts in particular for the ways in which they give us permission to play with and alter, at least momentarily, existing ways of thinking and knowing. The arts give us permission to arrange ourselves socially and hopefully, but not inherently, for the better. I think the arts and humanities teach us and give us permission to approach the social world, the flagpole, the school cafeteria, the school building, as a pliable material, as something that we can play with. And we need to play with it if we're going to make it better. As an educator in the arts and humanities, I want to invite my students to play with the social world and develop a strong and reflexive ethical sensibility that deepens their collective understanding of how and why their social actions reverberate on others, how their actions might reduce suffering, redress injustice, advance the common good, and perhaps produce something we might call aesthetic. This was me when I started New Urban Arts in 1997. You might want to see that. I'm looping back now. I was going to talk about this. I already told you this story, so I'm not going to tell you it again. I'm going to turn to the teaching model at New Urban Arts. Okay, so who are these people? These are some of these artist mentors that what we call artist mentors in urban arts. These are the yoga teachers, the writers, the makers, the painters. Each year, actually, young people at New Urban Arts, the high school students themselves, form a committee and they interview these applicants for this position and then they select them. About 20 get hired each year. It's actually a really competitive process now. It's become a bit of a thing. So, you know, they get something like 50 applicants or something. They interview them. I sat in on those interviews. It was great. And these artist mentors are available to support youth as they design independent collaborative projects. So they hang out in the studio 2 days a week for the entire year. They tend to be young, progressive, and drawn to the opportunity to partner alongside high school students. I'll give you a couple examples. I'm going to tell some stories. Here's Abel Hernandez. Abel actually lives in Columbus now. I'm going to see him tomorrow. His partner goes to Ohio State. She's doing an MFA. Abel was actually a student at New Urban Arts and then got a full ride to go to Rhode Island School of Design, majored in design there, and while he was a student, volunteered at New Urban Arts. This is Rick Benjamin. He's the State Poet Laureate of Rhode Island, a published poet. This is Kedron Frias, another high school student who found out about New Urban Arts because he exhibited in this gallery as a high school student. He's now a public school art teacher. So he teaches in the school during the day, and then he comes and volunteers at New Urban Arts during the afternoon. This is Jamila Woods. Jamila, she volunteered while she was a Brown University undergraduate. She's now a bit of a renowned published poet, spoken word poet, and a member of the sort of pop soul duet called M&O, Milo and Otis. They've been featured in Spin Magazine. This is Victoria Ruiz. She's the lead singer for a punk band called the Downtown Boys, which Rolling Stone actually just a couple months ago said was America's most exciting punk band. And several members of the Downtown Boys are volunteers at New Urban Arts. So there have been about 200 artist mentors over the years. I give you these 5 as a way of showing that youth have access to artist mentors who are accomplished or are well on their way to accomplishment. And with their support, high school students make adventurous and compelling work, I think, I'm biased, in creative writing, visual art, and music, among other disciplines. I'll show some visual art. I showed a couple of these examples today. This is a student who made this portrait of her mother. And this student received a full ride to go to Mass Art, majors in fibers. It's actually graduating this spring. This might be hard to see with this light, but this is documentation of a group of people working on a screen printed poster. Screen printing is very big in Providence. Here's a close-up of it, though. And what they did was, these were little taglines of how young people describe their own lives at New Urban Arts. So we get by, which kind of suggests a kind of ambivalence living in the city. We get by. We like color. We don't like to keep it simple. One of the artists who worked on this is Ian Cousins. His work is in the permanent collection of the RISD Museum. This is a mural, site-specific installation on a storefront window in Olneyville, Rhode Island. She was a junior at the time. She's studying at Rhode Island College. A self-portrait with embroidery. I showed this one too today. I told the group I like to think of this as Mad Max meets Little Red Riding Hood. This is a fashion show piece. They have a fashion show every year. The young woman on the left is Carmela Wilkins. She is now at the Parsons School of Design. And she was a student. And the young woman on the right, Priscilla Carrion, she was also a student and then became an artist mentor. So this is a very common thing in these organizations where high school students end up taking leadership positions within the organization. And she also got a full ride to RISD. I showed this slide too today. This is New Urban Arts hosts all kinds of community events, and in 2005, the organization led its first $1 million capital campaign, and it bought its first studio, and the studio was located, on the other end of that stage, across an intersection. I mean, it was about 300 feet away. And rather than hiring a moving company, they formed a bucket brigade. And it was with youth, artist mentors, volunteers, people walking by on the street, and they literally, if you've seen the amount of stuff that's in this, it's like his room. And it was sort of one paperclip at a time for the whole day. And it was the staging of this public performance, so it's kind of brilliant from a PR's point of view too, because you couldn't not notice what was happening. And there's some great documentation from that. You might not be able to see this, but the studio also tries to build an intellectual community, much like is happening here tonight, I hope. I hope that's what I'm trying to do. And so they have talks, dancing on top of dyslexia, the politics of troublemaking, who made us creative, from the page to the stage. They invite artists to come in and speak. Okay, so what's the impact of this work? And one of the ways that we can think about impact is thinking about alumni, much like we do here at the Academy. We tell stories of alumni, or we bring back alumni to tell their stories. Okay, so who are our alumni? The first two you've seen today, but you haven't seen the rest. Okay, this is Kwadwo Nkoma. This was the first high school student I recruited from Hope High School. He was the first high school student who was like, I'll do this with you. Whatever this is, let's do it. So Kwadwo's got like a special place in my heart. He lives on the West Coast now. He's actually a software engineer for Apple. And he's also an emerging musician. He produces hip-hop events. He's on SoundCloud. You can check him out. This is Adrienne Adeyemi. Adrienne, she took that photo over there on the right. You should check out her website. It's amazing. She's an amazing photographer. She's also now the director of organizational grants for the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. So all the states have councils on the arts. So she's becoming quite sort of prominent public figure in the arts in Rhode Island. This is Ashley Paniyawa. She's the director of youth programs at New Urban Arts, so now she's a full-time staff person there. This is Danilo Peguero. Danilo is the founder of a footwear company called Home Shoes, product of my environment, and he makes these kind of really cool urban duck boots. And he did that right before the duck boots had a resurgence, actually. This is Joelle Barrios. Joelle, she received a full ride to go to Northeastern University, and she competes nationally as a spoken word poet. And I mentioned Joelle, and I talked about this with the high school students today. A lot of her poetry focuses, her parents immigrated from Guatemala. So a lot of her poetry speaks to her own sort of transnational identity, as we might call it. And I don't want to, I'm not going to make any comment, I'm not making any statement about her status. But I was sharing today with high school students that one of the more difficult things of my job at Urban Arts was finding out, as we were helping seniors in high school apply for college, that they were not permanent lawful residents or U.S. citizens, and they didn't know it. And they wouldn't qualify for financial aid, obviously. And so they had been working up to this point their whole lives, and they would find out in that moment, this isn't going to happen. And it was tragic. It was awful. So questions of transnational identity make me think about that. And so I should say that there are 800,000 youth estimated in this country that are in that position. And my view is we need public policy to deal with it. We, in several situations, we managed actually to find philanthropists to fund individual kids' college educations privately. That's not public policy. But it did work in those individual cases. My final story, I shared this with the high school students today. Only one person in the audience knew of him, although you know of his work.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Monty. Monty who? Monty, I met Monty around 2000. He came into the studio during the day. He was a high school dropout. And we always had a tough time sort of negotiating what to do with high school dropouts because not getting a high school diploma is not a good thing. Monty was pretty convinced that high school wasn't the right thing for him. And he hung out in the studio most of the day. He worked on animation. He would copy popular visual culture, so comic books, movies. He was copying characters, doing these action sequences. We provided him computers, an internet connection, new software, digital editing tools from Photoshop, and he was there every day, tinkering around. And he was kind of so good that we hired him over the summer to help with so we hired him as, when he was roughly 17 or 18 to help with our younger kids. And he left Providence, and in his mid-20s, he managed to figure out a way to hack copyrighted video games and extract the characters from the games and then reanimate them so they were engaged in these action sequences from competing video game franchises. So there were things that teenagers hadn't seen before, where that company's character got to play around with that company's character. And he uploaded one of them to a website called Game Trailers, and it quickly became the most watched user-generated content on that website. So it got 4 million views. This production company sees what he's doing, and they hire him. And that production company's name is Rooster Teeth, and they're based in Austin, in LA. And they hire him to do some more web-based animation. And so he produces this web television series called Ruby. And Ruby has since become a kind of viral phenomenon. And there's this thing that young people do now called cosplay or costume play, where you dress up in the costume of your characters that you're watching, and then you play. You just sort of do role playing. And so people all around the world are doing costume play following Ruby. So using Ruby's characters. I'm not going to take credit for Monty. I mean, I didn't teach Monty. We didn't teach Monty much of, popular visual culture was Monty's teacher, but we did provide him access to those resources. And, I like to think, and I was saying today that I like to think about how if I hadn't taken this leap, that maybe we couldn't predict whether this would happen or not, whether all these people at Urban Arts would have taken this leap, whether he would have taken that leap to come into the studio and ask, what is this place? And is this place for me? Monty died tragically last year during a routine medical procedure. He had an allergic reaction. So he died at age 36. And he and his family asked that in lieu of donations, that people do something creative with their lives. That was their message. So Monty's legacy lives on. An amazing story. Okay. So these are some outcomes that we can celebrate, and they've been recognized. So this is a picture of my successor, Jason Yoon, who I hired as an undergraduate at RISD and sort of trained him up to do my job. And as a student, Rosalia, and they were honored at the White House. He was coached to do. I shouldn't show you. He was coached to do that photo, to look at her, not look at the camera. It makes a much more powerful image, doesn't it? I shouldn't have told you that. Okay. That was a special moment. And another way to think about impact of New Urban Arts is not through individual stories, but it's actually about citywide reforms that occur through efforts of places like New Urban Arts. On this map, you will see 5 places, those 5 red dots. Those are, I hope you can see them. Those places have all received that same recognition from the White House, and there's no other city like this in the US for this size. So like New York, they have some, but a city this tiny, it's like 170,000. So how did that happen? There are a lot of reasons for this, but one of it is that there are these group of people and myself who are sitting at a kitchen table every day, every month for 10 years, planning together and building each other's programs and talking about how we can have a citywide impact. One on the left, I don't think I have time to introduce them all, but in the upper left is Sebastian Ruth, who's a MacArthur Genius Award winner. He established a quartet, classical music quartet in the West End of Providence. They've been in residency now for 20 years, and they teach music lessons to kids. And so our studios were a mile apart from one another. We were doing this at the same time in conversation with one another. And so through our partnership, we started to sort of position Providence as a place where some really exciting work was happening. And with this recognition, along with 4 other major cities, Boston, Chicago, New York City, and DC. Okay, so let's listen. Boston, Chicago, New York City, DC, and Providence. One of those is not like the other. We received, as a city, a 5-year, $5 million grant to build a citywide system to build up after-school programming to a larger scale. And they made that announcement at New Urban Arts. So it was through these efforts, these grassroots efforts, 5 people taking the leap, 5 people working with each other, each of us getting, supporting one another, positioning the city as a place where this dynamic work was happening, and then leveraging that into this much bigger investment that changed the landscape of opportunity for young people in Providence. That happened in 15 years. Okay, so now I want to tell a story, because we're all feeling good about this, maybe Academy alumnus goes off, does good in the world, right? We're all feeling good. I just want to finish with a story that I think complicates things a little bit. So as I said earlier, I left in 2007. This was my last event at New Urban Arts, and I thought I'd include this photo. You might not be able to see, but I'm wearing a white paper hat that is like the drum major hat. Everybody knew how much I loved the Ohio State Marching Band in Providence. So for my last event at New Urban Arts, they made me a white drum major hat, and I got to lead a marching band into the studio, which was sweet. And that's Virginia, my daughter, who's sitting right there. 10 years ago, maybe. Should we stay here a little bit longer? Are you over there? Okay, so after graduate school, 5 years later, I get invited back to come to this place, the Center for Public Humanities at Brown, and that's in 2012, and I get to hang out in the studio. And I started to think about New Urban Arts and the city in new ways, the city of Providence in new ways. And at that time, the city was branding itself as the creative capital. And I don't know, this is Richard Florida's idea, and it's been circulating now for around 2 decades, but it's become highly influential globally. But the idea is that cities like Providence are going to reverse years of disinvestment and deterioration by attracting and alluring creatives back into the town. And the creatives are going to generate a kind of hip cultural landscape that's going to excite people, and they're also going to kickstart these new businesses that are going to then drive the economy. Okay, that's the theory. And young people are really key sort of protagonists in the creative city. And here's the vision for the creative city in Providence on the plan. On the right, we have young people. These are positioned as the next generation of creative thinkers. Okay, so we're going to cultivate them, and they're going to drive the city in the future. And it's an inclusive vision And on the left, we have sort of young, hip drummer who's sort of animating the city too, right? So that's the creative city. We know when you have a 20-year vision for a creative city in Columbus, this is a slide taken from the East Franklinton Creative City Plan. This is the Creative Cities Network. UNESCO has a global network of creative cities. So this is how mobile this policy discourse is. All around the world, people are becoming creative cities. And so as I considered the global reach, I started to think about how youth who are racialized and low income, those who reside in faded neighborhoods that are being rejuvenated, so to speak, figure into the creative city. I'm going to fast forward here. I need to tell this story. So, this is when I was hanging out in the studio, this after I had left, and I'm coming back, I'm sort of meeting with alumni, I'm meeting with current students, and I'm talking to them about their lives at New Urban Arts, and I'm talking to them about their experiences and the impact and the outcomes. And this one story was really shocking to me, really surprising. So this mural was made by a group of youth artists at New Urban Arts, and one of them made it when she was a freshman, the summer before her freshman year. And the idea for this mural was they were going to celebrate the West End neighborhood where she lived and where the West End is. And the West End is historically a neighborhood where young people have higher levels of lead, higher levels of poverty, higher levels of, you would say it's a racially segregated neighborhood. And they were going to try to reverse some of those stigmas by doing a mural that sort of celebrated some of the positive aspects of the neighborhood. So she did that the summer before her freshman year, and this was a kind of active civic engagement for her, right? This is her commitment to the common good. Two years later, a photograph of that mural appears in the New York Times with an article that is celebrating Providence as an up-and-coming hip city. As you'll see from this quote, artists from elsewhere in the city have flocked to the neighborhood in recent years looking for the last affordable loft spaces, helping to fuel a community-led revitalization effort that has resulted in brilliantly restored buildings and a crop of hip restaurants, cafes, and boutique shops appealing to New York residents. You know that neighborhood in Columbus. We all know that neighborhood, the gentrifying neighborhood. What's curious there is the use of the words community-led revitalization. So the suggestion is that the community, those who already reside in the neighborhood, are leading it at the same time that people are flocking in from elsewhere. The image that appears in the New York Times provides that evidence. This image provides that evidence. So you have two young Latinas who are walking home from school. They're smiling, they're happy in their community revitalized neighborhood. What I didn't know at the time was that the city itself was actually hiring a PR firm, well, probably, but they were largely responsible for it, at least we could say, branding the city as a newly creative place, right? And they were really pushing this vision for the city. And what ends up happening is it accelerates the vision itself. It attracts investment, okay? And it attracts developers, and it attracts new residents who are buying up those new properties, okay? 2 years after this article appears, this young woman is evicted from her home in the neighborhood. Her house was raised to make way for a parking lot for luxury lofts that were being built in an old mill building across the street. And so here you have this tragic irony of the cultural labor of this young woman is implicated in her own displacement. She is helping to project an image that advances this revitalization at her expense. And so what's kind of tragic about that, right, is that these kind of placemaking projects now are being funded throughout the country as a way of teaching young people the value of civic engagement. And I think we need to be asking questions about, well, what are the costs? The reason that she was living in that neighborhood was not because she didn't care about her neighborhood, or not because she lacked character, or because she lacked the desire to be civically engaged, right? So these are broader structural and economic questions that are reverberating on her own life that she's implicated in, and that she's being implicated in by organizations like the Urban Arts, and by private philanthropy, and by public policy. It's crazy and complicated. If there's a bright side to that story, this is a poster she made in response to that event. So she took the artistic skills she learned at New Urban Arts and made this screen print. And here she's casting her own vision of the creative city. And in this city, she has an octopus, which is a kind of really useful allegory for gentrification. Slippery, ill-defined, far-reaching, hard to pin down, hard to defend yourself from. Breaking through the windows of the loft and into her home. Okay, I'm going to end by saying, what does this story mean for us as we continue on our quest? For me, the first lesson, and I talked a lot about this with the high school students, is the necessity when I'm talking about a quest, I'm talking about a quest, a commitment to the common good. That's my quest. For me, the first lesson is the necessity to act with humility. We do not choose the conditions in which we act, and oftentimes those conditions are hard to decipher. And secondly, and relatedly, I believe as members and alumni of this private institution, with all of its benefits, we need to have intense and difficult conversations about what our commitments are to the public that move beyond acting with generosity and nobility, which recognize that we may be acting in ways that simply advance our own cause, and which seek alternatives that recognize the lived complexities and injustices of our age. And thirdly, we do not have to follow the script provided for us. And I believe the arts often provide us the permission to go off script. And by this, I mean the script for the creative city. This is a received script, but there are other scripts. So we have permission, we can have permission to go off script and against script in ways that are not always clear and not always consequential, rather than simply being a cheerleader of received wisdom. For example, that the creative city is good for all. We must go off script with a degree of skepticism and experimentation. That is what the teachers at the Academy so often taught me. That is the lesson I learned when I watched Mr. Dietrich surprisingly descend on a rope from the catwalk during upper school assembly. That is the lesson I learned when Mr. Morin brought in Barbie dolls to play with as we read Tess of D'Urberville. That is the lesson I learned when Miss Krell sent me to a room by myself as a 7th grader with a list of complex sentences to diagram on a chalkboard to engage in this playful exercise with words. That is the lesson I learned when Dr. Michael spent one entire philosophy class teaching us how to breathe. In each case, these teachers disrupted the script and had to contend with consequences they could neither predict nor control. They played with the social world as if it is a ball of clay. In our quest, if we want the world to be different, if we want the world to be better, it's our only option.